Hello class, my name is Madison Driscoll, and today we'll be discussing the pros and cons of transracial, transcultural adoptions, as well as the effect that it has on the child. Our text states that the majority of couples who are looking to adopt are white, but a majority of the children available are not. Throughout this debate, we will be addressing three main questions. What is the best interest of the child? Should cultural and racial factors play a role in deciding about the adoptive parents? And what developmental factors of the child should be taken into consideration with this issue. At the end, we will then provide an overview of the impact of poverty on transracial, transcultural adoptions. I will be representing the pro side of this debate today.
Hi, my name is Amanda Privatera, and I will also be representing the pro side of transracial and transcultural adoptions.
Hello, my name is Kaneda Crisp, and I will be representing the con side of transracial, transcultural adoptions.
Hi, my name is Brittany Rogers, and I will also be representing the con side of the transracial, transcultural adoptions. The first question that we will be addressing is, what is the best interest of the child?
Although there is no clear-cut definition of the best interest of a child, the Children's Bureau states that determinations are generally made by considering a number of factors related to the child's circumstances and the parent or caregiver's circumstances and the capacity to parent, with the child's ultimate safety and well-being the paramount concern. This sets a wide range of circumstances in regarding to what is best for the child. According to the article, Transracial Adoption, the Pros and Cons, and the Parent's Perspective, race matching is not in the best interest of the child. Transracial adoptions now allow children to find homes who would otherwise be denied the benefits of a permanent and healthy home, either for a significant period of time or, worst case scenario, forever. The average Black child will remain in foster care and other institutional homes 2 to 3 years longer than white children, and more than 50% of the children within foster care are currently Black. Locating permanent housing could have the potential to impact the child's entire life.
To piggyback off what Madison said, the need for permanency in children and youth in foster care is crucial to ensuring their well-being success in the future. The Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System in 2012 indicates that almost 40% of the 23,396 youth who aged out of the U.S. foster care system ended up homeless or couch surfed. Nearly 60% of young men had been convicted of a crime, and only 48% were employed. 75% of women and 33% of men receive government benefits to meet basic needs. 50% of involved in substance abuse, and 17% of those females were pregnant. These are not good statistics for pretty obvious reasons. And the National Adoption Institute states the following: while adoption does not automatically lead to emotional security and well-being, studies reviewed found that youth in adoptive families are more likely to report feeling a sense of belonging and closeness to parents than those who remain in care. In my opinion, the basic needs of safety and those physical needs being met are more important than focusing on the transracial and transcultural adoption. And this directly relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
While the pro side has valid points about basic needs being met of the children, the con side holds fast to the fact that children need socialization within cultures that represent their own. Per the National Association of Black Social Workers, it is imperative that Black children be placed in homes with Black parents. This is a statement that the National Association of Black Social Workers has held since the early 1970s. The association's transracial adoption statement indicates that ethnicity is a way of life in the United States and throughout the world. Our text also points out that while the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act of 1994 removes any barriers to adoption of children based solely on race, color, or national origin, the book also highlights that this was an effort to reduce the number of minority children who need homes. While this act applies to the majority of minority children, this act excludes children of Native American descent. The existence of the Indian Child Welfare Act, passed in 1978, requires the release of children that have Native American ancestry must also be released from the tribe. This points to the idea that cultural awareness and homes homes compiled of individuals of similar ethnicity are important to the well-being of a child.
And according to the Harvard website, opponents of transcultural, transracial adoption claim that in order for Black children to meet their psychological developmental needs, they must be placed with Black parents. They claim that cross-race adoption is psychologically damaging to the African American children, arguing that same race placement is important to develop a Black identity because white parents are not equipped to successfully convey a positive Black identity to their Black adopted children. The website also states that there's a stigma attached to transracial, transcultural adoptions. They state that people in the society maintain a negative view of adopted children because adoption is the result of parents losing their parental rights, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Opponents also allege that people may assume an adopted child was taken from his or her birth parents by social services, or that she was put up for adoption because he or she's biological mother was either raped or died. These are some of the stigmas that are attached to that. According to the Harvard article, children of minority face the negative stigma when they are adopted by white families because they are less likely to hide the fact that they were adopted, whereas if a white child were adopted by white parents, society wouldn't be able to tell that they were necessarily adopted. The second question that we will discuss is, should cultural or racial factors play a role in deciding about adoptive parents?
Cultural and racial factors should not be overlooked while considering the adoption of a child, but denying a child permanent housing in a loving environment based on differential backgrounds should not be the case. As Kaneda stated before, there was a law enacted in 1944 that does just that. This prohibits the adoption decision based solely on just race, color, or national origin. It was created in efforts to reduce the time that minority children were spending within the foster care system. It should be noted that this law does not affect the Indian Child Welfare Act that was put in place for adoptions of Native American children.
And again, Madison said, I don't think that anybody disagrees that in a perfect world, race wouldn't be a determining factor in any scenario, especially adoption, but that's just not the reality that we live in. According to the National Adoption Institute, agencies routinely separate children and prospective parents into racial categories, assign children to racially matched parents, and hold children for whom there is no racial match available, rather than place them with waiting parents of another race. Extensive affirmative action efforts have been made over the past 2 decades to recruit Black parents to adopt an overwhelming number of Black children waiting for homes. The state and federal governments have provided financial subsidies to encourage these adoptions. Agencies have radically revised parental fitness criteria for Black adopters to permit more to qualify, and have mounted advertising campaigns to reach out to the Black community. However, these efforts have not produced enough Black adoptive parents for all of the waiting Black children in foster care. Public adoption agencies refuse to consider transracial placement except as a very last resort, and some agencies refuse under any condition to place kids across racial or cultural lines. And due to this, kids linger in foster care longer, and we'll talk a little bit more about the effects of that later on.
While the con side acknowledges that it is best for the children to be placed in a home that has stability, Raleigh 2016 speaks about the color line and how Black individuals are often classified as other within the society here in America. This article also references other scholars who indicate that the color line has moved from white/non-white to Black and non-Black. With the shifting of the color line, it may become more difficult for white parents to assist their Black children with navigating the world. This same article points out that during the boom in international adoptions, a parent seeking to adopt from an African country, many times when asked why not adopt a Black child from the United States, these adopted parents cited various stigma activities such as having children who were born drug addicted or had a family history of drug addiction. This indicates that the same parents who are seeking to adopt African children hold negative thoughts and viewpoints which they may later apply to the children that they adopt.
According to the book, the National Association of Black Social Workers has historically been opposed to transracial adoptions, believing that African American children raised in a white home will lose connection with their race and culture, that the children will grow up not fitting into either culture. Our society has a lot of prejudice that is occurring whether we like it or not. This needs to be taken into consideration when deciding on placement of adoption. It's up to the parents of the child to teach the child on how to deal with the prejudice and racism. If a child of minorities, such as Hispanic, Native American, African American, or so on, are adopted by white parents, the parents are more than likely not going to understand what the child will be exposed to in terms of prejudice and racism. The third question that we will discuss is what developmental factors for the child should be taken into consideration with this issue.
Developmental factors of the child should be of extreme importance when considering the factors of transracial and transcultural adoptions. As stated in the article, Transracial Adoption, the Pros and Cons and the Parent's Perspective, transracial adoptions prevent the child from passing as their parents' biological offspring, rejecting their adoption status. This article further states that there becomes a healthier acceptance within the adoption, and the child will gain more positive self-identification within themselves and their adoptive status.
And to go off of that, to get a little bit more in depth, according to the Child Welfare Manual, where we got a lot of our information, it states that children who are adopted as infants are affected by the adoption throughout their entire lives, which I think we all can understand and probably empathize with. It also states that children adopted later in life come to understand adoption during a different developmental stage, unlike infants, and that trauma plays a big role in that. And those who have experienced trauma or neglect may remember such experiences, which can further complicate their self-image and their self-esteem. Transracial, cross-cultural, and special needs issues may also affect a child's adoption experience, and all adopted children will have to grieve the loss of their biological family, their heritage, and their culture to some extent throughout their developmental time. Adoptive families can facilitate and assist in this natural grieving process by being comfortable with using adoption language and discussing adoption issues. From reading this article, it sounded like the most important thing in order to help facilitate a healthy self-image and self-esteem was to be transparent throughout a child's life and talk to them in a way where they can understand what's going on and what has happened, and not cutting out that culture entirely. And by doing that, it will help them learn to feel accepted into the culture of their adoptive family and the culture that they were born into.
On the developmental side, in regards to the cons of transracial and transcultural adoption, Kelly, Quinn, and Slater indicated that the formation of preference for in-group faces versus out-group faces is present at the 6-month marker of development and fully developed by the age of 9 months. With the well-documented phenomenon of other race bias, which is the preference for in-group faces versus that of out-group faces, a Black child placed in a white household, which means white primary caretakers would therefore form in-group of white faces and therefore categorizing Black faces as out-group members. This would stunt the child's development and their possible socialization with other Black children and Black families later in life. This also ties into the Clark and Clark study of the 1940s that coupled with the Brown versus Board of Education decision and the white and Black doll experiment, where Black children often associated negative terms and ideals with the Black doll, while placing all the positive with the white doll. This can be seen as an inherent con for that child as they grow and develop into an adult who must navigate the world.
And going off of what Kanetta said, another issue is, according to Arnold Silverman, is that Black children adopted transracially do not develop coping mechanisms necessary to function in a society that is inherently racist against African Americans. This may make it more difficult for when children grow up as adults because they didn't learn the correct coping mechanisms and ways to deal with situations in order to function in society. Now we will discuss the impact of poverty on adoption.
And it was mentioned before that state agencies have provided some subsidy for Black foster parents and all foster parents who are wanting to adopt children out of foster care. And according to the National Adoption Institute, they said that the opponents of transracial adoption also claim that not enough has been done to recruit Black adopters. And while it's true that more could be done, Blacks are already adopting at the same rates. And we had discussed as a group before how to tackle this poverty question and answer it in a way that kind of compares the differences between adopting out of foster care and private adoptions. And I think the biggest that we came up with was you get paid to adopt children out of foster care. You'll get a monthly stipend after the case has been closed. You're, at least in Missouri, all of your legal fees are covered. They get Medicaid until age 21. They'll get daycare assistance. Unlike adoption, private adoptions, parents have to pay to get an attorney, to get their home studies done, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times people can't afford to pay $20,000 or however much it costs to adopt privately. And those families are the ones that usually adopt the babies. And so people who want to adopt kids out of foster care usually are the ones that are from a lower socioeconomic status.
As a conclusion, as a group, we've come to the general consensus that transracial and transcultural adoption should be considered. However, when these adoptions are, we feel that they should be structured in a way that encourages the cultural competency of the adoptive parents and also encourages those parents to provide opportunities for those children to socialize and interact with members of their cultural background and heritage.
We posted our bibliography to the discussion board forum. And if you have any questions regarding transracial or transcultural adoptions, just comment in the discussion board and we will do our best to answer those for you guys. Thanks for listening.